remind you, when you travel, you actually stay in a hotel or a motel. It was a bed and breakfast, but what is now a popular age is Airbnb, which helps folks rent out their homes online for a fee. They've come under widespread criticism due to racial discrimination. The San Francisco company, which is valued at $25 billion, serves more than 60 million guests in 191 countries. But there's a problem, and that is when they rent out their homes, they get to determine who lives in it, and that means in many cases black folks have rented, and they've had folks say, we don't like black folks, will not rent to you. Here's a young man who actually sued Airbnb.
Signing up as a guest is quite easy. You just need to scan your driver's license or your passport and then connect your Airbnb ID with the social network.
Like your Facebook or your Google or your LinkedIn, and that connects your Airbnb account to your other online accounts.
All right, folks, that's actually the Airbnb commercial, which lays out who they are. But recent studies have shown that seeing those photo IDs have prompted some people to say they will not book to minorities. Blacks have been denied, and we've had numerous complaints and actual criticism. Here was a user who filed a class action lawsuit accusing Airbnb of violating his Civil Rights and Fair Housing Act.
In his ad, it said, stay in the heart of Philadelphia. So I was like, this is cool, $78, this is a good deal. But when I went to request it, he got back to me the next morning, told me that the space was unavailable. So when I reached out to him under the fake profiles, subsequently he accepted both of them.
Well, to help fix this rampant discrimination, Airbnb hired the former Washington director of the ACLU, Laura Murphy. Based on her report, the company will now institute some new policies that include setting a new non-discrimination policy beyond what federal law requires, asking users to agree to a community commitment to work with people of all persuasions, accelerating the use of instant bookings, which also don't require host approval. Now, on yesterday, Airbnb made this announcement, notifying all of their users first. They've also hired two big-time advisors, Eric Holder, former U.S. Attorney General, and John Relman, a D.C. civil rights attorney, to help them with this. We now turn to Laura Murphy, who is with us. And so, Laura, and also, of course, we have our panel here as well. A. Scott Bolden, former chair of the D.C. Democratic Party and litigation partner at Reed Smith, David Swerlick, an assistant editor of the Washington Post, and Sue Zodak, the founder and CEO at the Zodak Agency as well. So, Laura, I want to go to you first. This is, again, for the people who use it, but many people have not even heard of Airbnb.
Right.
And when you hear these stories where literally folks say, oh, I was approved, I was good, and all of a sudden they realize, oh my God, you're black. I don't want black folks in my house. I mean, this is a problem for them because that can happen in a hotel. That happened in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and the 60s, but you have federal laws. Do those same federal laws apply to Airbnb?
Not really clearly. And so that's why Airbnb decided to do something and not wait for the law to be decided or not wait for the resolution of litigation. But they decided that their motto is belong anywhere. And you can't have a sense of belonging when people are being discriminated against. So they, based on their values, they prohibited this kind of conduct that would have been prohibited by hotels and that sort of thing.
So how is it that the federal law doesn't apply? Because if this is a public, first of all, are they a public company or private?
They're private.
Okay, private company. But individual, so how does the federal law not apply to them, or is it a gray area?
It's a gray area, and legal scholars are debating the issue now, but there's always been a carve-out in all of the public accommodations and federal fair housing laws for owner-occupied residences, and the vast majority of Airbnb listings are, rooms in someone's house, or cots, or beds, or their private home. They go away for a weekend and they rent it out. So those people would be carved out of the existing fair housing laws. And those laws were written way before Airbnb was ever conceived of. And so you could argue the issue both ways. You could argue that the law should apply, or you could argue that the law clearly exempts people like the owner-occupied people, but there are also people in Airbnb who do have, 3 properties, and then it gets into a gray area because it's no longer their personal home.
So with these suggestions, these recommendations, how will it fix the problem? I mean, will Airbnb penalize individuals who are involved in discrimination?
All right, so there are three main commitments that Airbnb has made. One is a very strong non-discrimination policy that everyone must sign and agree to abide by as a condition of operating on the site. Second, the company has agreed to diversify itself because it realizes that because it wasn't a well-integrated company, they didn't have diversity of thought, they didn't have people with experience with discrimination and racism, and they're going to change that. They've committed to goals and hiring goals and contracting goals and that sort of thing.
So basically Airbnb was like many other Silicon Valley companies,
exactly,
pretty much all white.
Exactly. And then the third thing they've done, which no other Silicon Valley company has done, is that they are using technology to root out discrimination. So they've already hired 12 people, engineers, data scientists, researchers, designers, to come up with ways to monitor the behavior of people on their site and to come up with interventions to stop discrimination before it starts. So I think these three commitments, and there are many other things they're doing. They're working with HBCUs, they're recruiting there, they're, as I said, contracting. But these three commitments form the basis of the 32-page report and all of the recommendations therein.
We're going to panel here. I mean, this is what is interesting here is, I mean, obviously technology changes the game, but when you have individuals who literally are saying, I am not written to minorities, I don't want folks in my house, but I've written to somebody else. I mean, that is a problem, and obviously for a company like this here, last thing you want is to get tagged with that, because it can flip and folks can target your company and say, don't use Airbnb.
Exactly. And really, it's not enough to say that the housing discrimination laws of the United States don't apply to Airbnb or these individuals. It's unclear. I would argue that Airbnb just connects people, so it's not applicable. But the beauty of this story is that, one, this company voluntarily has taken this underway. It may be business-driven, it may be image-driven.
A lawsuit was filed.
Yeah, a lawsuit was filed.
So it's not like they did it in advance before a lawsuit. So they're responding.
It may be, but that lawsuit is still pending, though.
Yeah, I agree with Scott, though. Right. A lawsuit brought up citizens who were discriminated against pushed this forward, but they've decided, with working with Laura and others, to essentially say, regardless of what the the Fair Housing Act says, we're going to require our vendors.
Yeah, but this is a case study, though. This is a case study.
PR, though, as opposed to them really wanting to fix the problem. I think can they fix the problem with algorithms and at the end of the day, they are trying to play both sides. I mean, the reason they don't want these laws to apply to them, like B&Bs, is they don't want to have the inspections that B&Bs require, and they also don't want to pay the taxes that hotels have to pay.
That is absolutely false. They have said that the laws apply in certain instances, and they have voluntarily offered to pay taxes. In Chicago, they've increased the taxes on their rentals 4% to help pay for the homeless problem. So in a lot of jurisdictions, they're paying lodging taxes just like anyone else. And I tell you, the executives met every single business day for the last 90 days. I was there. This is more than what's required to deal with a PR issue. This is long-term investment in re-engineering a company so that it's more diverse, more progressive, and more inclusive.
But Roland, the beauty of this issue or this company is that in the end, it's all very voluntary. It's all voluntary, one. Two, they went out and hired some very credible representatives. They're accepting their recommendations, and now they're enforcing it not with a hammer, but with incentives, as Laura and I were talking about earlier.
But here's the reality. Lawsuit was filed. If you are a company like this here, yes, the reason you take those very actions, because as Sue said, PR is involved. You also, because the young brother.
Every company doesn't do that.
No, every company.
After a lawsuit.
Every company doesn't do it until that pressure gets turned up. And then all of a sudden it's, look, we better move real quick because, I mean, look, the last thing you want, if you're Airbnb, for that hashtag to all of a sudden stick, and then, look, To this day, there are people who still don't buy Texaco gas.
Would you prefer that they didn't do
No.
this?
No. I'm just
I'm trying to figure out if you're being
what I'm saying is to
Mm-hmm.
Sue's point. I understand why they're doing it, and so I'm not one like, oh, it's just a wonderful thing.
Yeah, no.
My point is they're doing it for a reason. I'm just saying why they're having to do it.
Yeah, Sue is right, and you're right. Right, it is PR.
Right.
PR is part of business, but also right. You can imagine a situation where they would drag their heels further, or you can imagine a situation where, let's say down the road, they don't live up to what they've agreed to. Then
The proof is in that pudding.
They're putting themselves out there. They in this report that I wrote, they have all of these commitments that they're making publicly to hiring goals, to contracting goals. Most companies don't do that. They try to deny the problem exists. They dig in. They wait for the lawsuit to be resolved. No, they took a very aggressive role in embracing that, look, we have a discrimination problem. We admit it, and we want to fix it.
And we've been, of course, covering this because for the last 18 months, Reverend Jackson has been going after Silicon Valley companies, and when they wouldn't release their numbers, they wouldn't say what in terms of who was working there, and then that public pressure led to Intel announcing a $300 million initiative.
And the public pressure should keep going because you got to hold Airbnb's feet to the fire.
So there you go.
This is also just the tip of the iceberg, though. They have issues with, corporate companies trying to buy up cheap apartments, and these companies own hundreds of apartments, and they're renting them on Airbnb, and that's become the trend. And they're trying to
Airbnb site. They're
trying to get
multiple
ahead
listers
of that.
in many cities.
Here's what I'm looking at. What Reverend Jackson has done for the last 18 months to 2 years, putting the pressure on Silicon Valley companies. And yes, they have to recognize that they are making significant amounts of money. And when you look at who they're employing, not many of us at all, Latinos as well. And so, that pressure is important. Laura, we appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Folks, in fact, coming up next, we're going to talk about a Hollywood report showing that, frankly, Hollywood can talk about being liberal, all that sort of stuff along those lines. But guess what? Their numbers look like the modern-day Alabama that we saw in the 60s.